Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, we're evaluating the coaching staff and the president of baseball operations for the Philadelphia Phillies for their 2024 efforts.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space here in Philadelphia. I've been on the radio at 97.5 The Fanatic, talking all Philly sports for 5 years now. I've been a 3 years credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member, and this is my third season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're consuming this in podcast form. I'd really appreciate that. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. It takes like a second to do. It's totally free. Get you notifications when new episodes are posted. That's a win, win, win. And let me throw one more on there. It really helps me out as well when you subscribe to the channel. It's the number one way to say thank you for the content on Locked On Phillies. So I appreciate everyone who's done that and everyone who's going to do that. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. You got to get those tickets somewhere. Go ahead and check out Game Time. They are the absolute best. Now, today we are going to be evaluating the coaching staff for the 2024 season. This is our final evaluation episode. So we're going to wrap up with this. And like I said, on Monday, we are going to get into free agents to watch. So we're going to do a whole bunch of breakdowns on guys that could be Philadelphia Phillies targets, big-time names. Buster Olney, MLB Insider, says he believes the Phillies are going to get a star player. They're going to make a big-time move, and that seems to be the feeling around baseball. So a lot of that stuff coming up on Monday. But let's finish up our evaluations first, and we're starting with the manager. Then we'll move into, I have it termed as the position coaches, but we'll do Kevin Long and Caleb Cotham, the hitting coach and pitching coach, respectively. And then we're going to evaluate the president of baseball operations, the man behind the machine, Dave Dombrowski. So we'll get into all of this. But first, let's start with Rob Thomson, who has become a very, I don't know if I want to say controversial, let's call him polarizing figure in the city of Philadelphia these days. Now, Rob Thomson took over in 2022, halfway through the year, for Joe Girardi, who was doing a miserable job. Joe Girardi had not made the playoffs for the Philadelphia Phillies. And as soon as he's gone, they go on a run, and Rob Thomson takes this team to a World Series appearance, a National League pennant. They go on an amazing stretch. We all remember it like it was yesterday. And Rob Thomson was the darling of Philadelphia, Philly Rob, topper. Everybody loved him. And then they fall short in 2022, and it's okay because you say, wow, well, this team got a taste. They're going to be back. And in 2023, they nearly were. They go to the NLCS, but you collapse to the Arizona Diamondbacks. And you kind of somewhat underachieved in the regular season. I don't know. They still won 91 games in 2023. And then 2024, which is the season we're really evaluating Rob Thomson for, they go out, they win 95 games, and they win the NL East for the first time in 13 years, and they are the second best record in baseball heading into the postseason. And then you get bounced in the NLDS. And it makes it really tough to evaluate Rob Thomson because part of the fan base says, this dude just wins. He wins and wins and wins in the regular season. He puts together great teams that stick together through thick and thin. They've gone through adversity. They've fought through it. They've come out on the other side. They don't seem to ever panic. They find ways to high win totals, and they're in the postseason, and they're quality teams. And then the other half of the fan base says, well, in the postseason, he doesn't seem to make the right moves, and he's a little bit sketchy in the regular season with the way he handles the bullpen, and you come up short 3 years in a row. And while the goal is lofty, it's still the goal. World Series is the goal. The players will tell you that. Rob Thomson will tell you that. The owner will tell you that. So, I mean, if that's what the organization is telling you, that's the standard we have to hold them to. So how do you evaluate Rob Thomson? Let's look at 2024, right? Because that's all we're looking at. This isn't the story of 22. This isn't the story of 23. But in 2024, Rob Thomson led this team to a National League East title. He led this team to the second best record in all of baseball. And yet there was still this 2-month stretch where they completely couldn't figure out how to play baseball. They had one of the hottest stretches in the history of the franchise, and then one of the coldest stretches you could ever imagine from a team of this talent. So I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag, which is weird to say about the second winningest manager in Major League Baseball this year. I am more on Rob Thomson's side than I think the average fan. I do think the average fan kind of sits in the middle and sees the upside and the downside on Rob Thomson. In fact, I think the average fan probably skews a little bit negatively on Rob Thomson these days because of the postseason disappointments. And I understand that. But to me, knowing what the difficulty of the regular season is, it is a marathon, not a sprint. And listen, marathons, not fun. I'm actually training for one right now, personally. Just a little personal note there. I'm a running guy now. Humble brag. Just kidding. It sucks. But point is, if you've ever trained for a long run or trained for a marathon, you know that it's a long way to go, and there are definitely tough points in the process. And Rob Thomson is very good at managing that. Honestly, a baseball manager, what their number one job to me is to go ahead and keep the team together through the long slog of the regular season. And Rob Thomson does that as well as anybody in baseball. That's the number one thing. Well, let's call it 1A, because 1B is making the right decisions in the clutch to make sure your team has the best chance to win. And Rob Thomson has not been a great bullpen manager during his time here in Philadelphia. He makes questionable decisions. And I don't know that he made too many of those in the postseason this year. Well, partially because they only played, 4 games? But I don't know. I don't look at the postseason and say, well, that's Rob Thompson's fault. The bullpen just didn't give him anything. Everybody stunk in the bullpen. And the lineup, went quiet, but there was only so much he could change. And in fact, and I hated the decision to sit Alec Bohm. I really did. Because the way I looked at it was, well, you spent all season believing in your guys, sticking with dudes like Nick Castellanos when he was struggling, Bryson Stott when he was struggling. And then you get to the postseason, Alec Bohm sits game 2 of a series where you need 3 games to win, and you were down 0-1 in that series. Like, that felt like a panic move from Rob Thomson. It felt very unlike him, right? So that was a real big blemish on the way that he managed in the postseason. That was probably my biggest one, because the bullpen management, unless it's like the Jose Alvarado move in the World Series in 2022, where I was blatantly against it when it happened, I was blatantly against it after, and the result obviously did not go in the Phillies' favor. Like, that's one where it's simple to say, like, that was the wrong decision. I would have done that totally differently. I can't think of many of those in the postseason. You can nitpick, but it has to be blatantly obvious for me to say, like, oh, that is definitively a bad decision by Rob Thomson. I don't think he had many of those in the postseason this year, but I also do think he had some of those throughout the course of the regular season, going to these guys in these spots. And listen, Carlos Estevez really helped him out, because that gave you a certified closer that you can go to in every spot there. And in the latter half of this, or the latter part of the season, I should say, where you had Estevez post-trade deadline, I thought you got much better with his bullpen management. And the bullpen, which we're going to talk about with Caleb Cotham coming up when we do the pitching coach evaluation, was incredible in the regular season. And a lot of stuff was really good about this team. So at the end of the day, Rob Thomson got an extension for 2026. So he's not managing on a 1-year deal, which we know is something that is a vote of confidence for the manager. I'll tell you this right now, it fully deserved for Rob Thomson to get as many extensions as he'd like until he stops winning baseball games in the regular season. Like, that's when you fire a guy. That's when you move on from a guy, is when you have the regular season issues. When you fall in the postseason, after a while, you're going to have to make a change for somebody to get you over the hump. But remember, Joe Girardi made 3 seasons in this city, not making the postseason, or rather 2.5 seasons, before he was removed as Philadelphia Phillies manager. They're not going to be quick to move on from Rob Thomson. Anyone thinks he's getting fired or was going to get fired, I thought it was crazy. When you look around baseball, managers in general make minimal impact compared to a football coach, a basketball coach, a hockey coach. Baseball managers make the least impact of any professional coaches. But Rob Thomson, it would be hard for you to argue to me that there are guys out there, multiple, like significant amount of coaches, that you would take over Rob Thomson. Because one, there's not that much tangible evidence to say this guy's a better coach than that guy. This guy's a better manager than that guy. 2, the little tangible evidence that we do have about what's good and what's bad about managers, Rob Thomson excels in. It's win total. It's keeping the team together. It's these clearly evident things that you can see over the course of 162 games and then the postseason. And bottom line is, Rob Thomson is not a perfect manager, but he is an above average one, and he knows how to work this locker room, and he knows how to get this team to win a lot of baseball games. And at the end of the day, when you get to the postseason, it's rare that you say, oh, well, a manager won it, right? A manager is the reason we have that World Series. It is the players. It's the stars. It is the guys that you pay $300+ million to go out there and play this game that make the difference. So I don't put too much on Rob Thomson's plate. And the stuff that I do, I think he's handled pretty well during his time. So compared to expectations, I would say that Rob Thomson had himself we'll call it an A- season. I'm going to call it an A- season. Like, I expected their win total to be around 96, 97 games. I think my prediction was 97. But bottom line is he won 95 games and won the division. Had the second best record in baseball. I can't fault him on that. In the postseason, when it comes to the manager, it is what it is. I'm still upset about it. I'm not saying it's okay that they went out in the postseason the way that they did, but I'm saying, what am I going to say? It's Rob Thomson. He didn't pick up a bat. He didn't throw a pitch. So yeah, an A- compared to expectations. Compared to his peers, I'm going to give him a flat out A. I can't go A+ because postseason, when you get to the A+, like elite level of management, postseason success plays into that. And they didn't have that this year. But I'm giving him an A because, well, he had one of the best teams in baseball this year under his watch. And he's done it multiple seasons in a row now. I'll tell you right now, Rob Thomson is a good manager. If the Philadelphia Phillies fall short of the World Series, it will most likely not be because of Rob Thomson. It won't be. It just realistically, everyone wants to point at the guy in charge, the manager. You see his face all the time. He's the guy that talks to the media most often. But at the end of the day in baseball, they don't do all that much. And the little that they do is almost imperceptible at points. And it's nitpicky to kind of go after the minutia that goes into being a manager, keeping the team together, winning games. That's how you evaluate a manager. And Rob Thomson has had some pretty darn good baseball teams here in Philadelphia. So a strong year from Rob Thomson. I know people that might drive people insane to hear with the way that the season ended. But that is the reality of evaluating a manager, to me, for Major League Baseball. And I think Rob Thomson is a pretty darn good one. Now, I also think he has some pretty good position coaches beneath him. And I don't think they get enough credit, especially one of the two guys. So we'll break down the Kevin Long, Caleb Cotham evaluations coming up next as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But first, let's talk about Game Time because they've got this new feature. It's absolutely awesome. It's called Game Time Picks. So here's what it means. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets and all those dumb price gouging looks. And you don't want to have to deal with that where you have to scroll through a billion of them on maybe another site. No, Game Time Picks curates everything to your needs to make it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, anything you want to get tickets through Game Time for. Plus, they got all-in pricing, which means you toggle this feature, it'll show the total up front. No surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy your ticket, so you know what your view is going to look like. Or you can go ahead and look at, well, you get this too. I don't know what I said. Or you get both. It's everything. I should say and. The Game Time guarantee means if you find seats in the same row and section for less, you'll get 110% of the difference credited back from Game Time. And your ticket is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry with the Game Time ticket coverage. What else do you need to hear? They're the best place to get tickets. There is no close second. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time. All right, let's talk about Caleb Cotham and let's talk about Kevin Long, the two position coaches, as I'm terming them, for the Philadelphia Phillies. So we'll start with Kevin Long because this is a really, really misguided opinion that people have of Kevin Long here in the city. Here's the way that you look at it, right? The approach that the Philadelphia Phillies use at the plate, is that Kevin Long? Somewhat, yes. And he's going to wear that with the fan base and the public and the media and everybody. They're going to look at this team that's free swinging and probably too much so and goes strikeout or homer, boom or bust, and say, well, that's Kevin Long. That's the way he teaches them to approach at bats, and that's his fault. And I don't like that philosophy. Well, guess what? I mean, you look at Kevin Long and you say, okay, we're going to put that all on him. Well, guess what he gets credit for? Putting together one of the better offenses in baseball then. Now, if you don't want to give him credit for that, you're probably more right than wrong too, because just like a manager, a pitching coach, a hitting coach, well, they get too much credit and too much blame, right? Here's what Kevin Long does. He works on guys with little swing tips. He may work on guys' approach tips and stuff like that. Like, he works through that with certain players, but ultimately, you think he's teaching anything to Bryce Harper? No. What's happening is Bryce Harper is going through his at-bats, and he might have something that Kevin Long sees and like, hey, got a little hitch here. Hey, you're not catching the ball in the front window enough. Hey, you seem like you're not recognizing this pitch. Let's get you some work on staying back so that you can see that better, the off speed or something like that. I'm not saying any of those things are what happened with Bryce Harper this year. He had a darn good year. I'm just giving examples. Like, that's what he does. It's minor tweaks. It's not go up there and swing at this pitch. Go up there and don't swing at this pitch. Nick Castellanos, go swing at that slider away constantly. Like no. So the approach, yes, that's something that the Philadelphia Phillies need to work on. And part of that can be put on Kevin Long. But you also look at a team that had one of the top scoring offenses in all of baseball and 195 games. Like, I keep going back to that. They're a good baseball team, guys. They are. And 4 games in October does not change the talent level of the team. And it doesn't totally change the coaching level of the team. So Kevin Long, I'm going to go ahead and give him a B, simply because, and he's going to get like an A- compared to other hitting coaches because the Phillies have a great offense. And part of that is having great players. But the reason I give him a B compared to expectations is just because this team went through a really bad slump for like 2 months and there was no answer and they couldn't figure it out. And that does counterbalance the really hot stretch that they had at the start of the year. And even when they had the hot stretch, it seemed to be more pitching than hitting. So maybe even let's go B-, actually. B is a little bit generous. Now, he's still an above average hitting coach and was above average for expectations this year. But you can't just rip them apart for the approach at the plate. These are major league hitters that make their own decisions. They're not babysitting them like they're high school kids or middle school kids or little league kids where you're giving them the take sign from down there at third base. Like, you trust your hitters to make those decisions. The philosophy is something that may need to change, and that's the biggest knock on Kevin Long. But again, a guy that helps this team more than he hurts this team, and a guy that this dude is majorly underrated. We do not talk about him enough. Caleb Cotham. That's the next guy we're going to evaluate, the pitching coach for your Philadelphia Phillies. Think about what happened with the Philadelphia Phillies this year. Zach Wheeler was an all-star. Ranger Suarez was an all-star. Christopher Sanchez was an all-star. Jeff Hoffman was an all-star. Matt Strahm was an all-star. You had three guys get Cy Young votes in the rotation. And guess what? Ranger Suarez probably would have too if he had pitched enough innings. But Nola, Sanchez, Wheeler get votes. Wheeler came in second. You have 2 all-stars in the bullpen. One of those guys is going to probably get paid as a starter. Your bullpen had one of the best bullpen ERAs in baseball. Your starting rotation had one of the best rotation ERAs in baseball. Your pitching staff in general had one of the best ERAs in baseball. And look at the guys you develop. A Ryan Kerkering turning into a star before our very eyes. Jeff Hoffman and Matt Strahm coming out of nowhere to be all-stars. Carlos Estevez getting put in the right role with this team. Christopher Sanchez getting a long-term contract out of nowhere because he turned into a bona fide like Cy Young vote getter. Ranger Suarez having a top tier stretch of the season before he got hurt. Zach Wheeler being an elite level pitcher. Aaron Nola getting paid big time to come back here because of what he's done. Some of that's on the pitchers, but man, has Caleb Cotham been really, really good at getting these guys in the right frame of mind to be elite level pitchers. The pitching staff, you can't say enough good things about him. You really can't. Top to bottom, outside of Taijuan Walker, they were unbelievable to a man this year, right? The guys that I'm talking about, the guys that are supposed to be on this team, not guys that came up because of injury or everything. And even guys that came, you had a guy like Tyler Phillips come up and throw a complete game shutout for this team. That's unbelievable. And part of that is credit to the player. And JT Realmuto and Garrett Stubbs behind the dish doing a good job catching them and actually managing the game. But Caleb Cotham is so underrated. He is one of the best positional coaches in baseball. And the Phillies are very, very lucky to have him here in Philadelphia. And we look at Kevin Long all this much about he needs to change the approach of this team hitting-wise. But we never give credit to Caleb Cotham for the way that he preps his pitchers to be top level arms. I can't say enough good things about this guy. It's A+ across the board for Caleb Cotham. It has to be. He was amazing in 2024 in creating a great rotation and a great bullpen, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that, right? And When I say all the credit in the world for that, rightfully to a coach. Same thing as Kevin Long. A lot of it goes on the players. Most of it goes on the players. They're the ones out there throwing the pitches. They're the ones out there swinging the bats on the hitter side. So I'm not saying like, well, Caleb Cotham's the secret sauce that makes the Phillies rotation good. No, I'm not saying that. I think that's Zach Wheeler and Nola and Sanchez and Suarez. And when you go to the pen, all of those arms back there. So I'm not going to go against what I just told you with Kevin Long and say, well, Caleb Cotham does all of this stuff. No, it's largely the players, right? But at the end of the day, when you have that great of a rotation and that great of a bullpen, credit has to go to the pitching staff, the pitching coaching staff. And the head of that snake is Caleb Cotham. And he does a darn good job. So if you haven't given props to Caleb Cotham lately, maybe the next conversation you have about the Phillies, throw out, hey, think about how good Caleb Cotham's been. Just throw that out there. Start that train. Give Caleb Cotham respect. We're going to try and keep that up in 2025, as long as he continues to do the job that he's done over the past couple of years with the Philadelphia Phillies, which I believe he will, because, I mean, he's just been an absolute great hire for the Philadelphia Phillies as pitching coach. Coming up, speaking of hirings and firings and signings and tradings and all of that stuff, we're going to talk Dave Dombrowski. I called him the man behind the machine. Well, there might have been a little bit of a missing gear in the Philadelphia Phillies machine this past year when it came to Dave Dombrowski's requirements, or I guess responsibilities, I should say. We will discuss a down here for a future Hall of Famer as we wrap up today's episode. But let's talk about FanDuel first, because you need to be ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. They're amazing. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You should bet with FanDuel. They're the absolute best. Speaking of live bets, you know what I did on FanDuel last night? There was a big college football game, Georgia Tech. Halftime, Georgia was down. I took them. They were the favorite before the game. I got them at plus money. That game ended up going 8 overtimes. My hair's going to be gray because of it, but Georgia pulled it out. I made some great money. You know, I did that live betting with FanDuel. If that had been a $5 bet, my first $5 bet, it would have been $150 in bonus bets. Now, I've been using FanDuel forever, but I still won great money. So go ahead and check them out with FanDuel.com. Again, $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, last thing we want to talk about here, last guy, I should say, the final evaluation of 2024, Dave Dombrowski. Now, Dave Dombrowski, how we evaluate him, right? We got to look at things this way. We're not going to talk Taijuan Walker because that was a signing ahead of the 2023 season. We're going to talk what he did in the offseason leading up to this year and this year, some of the acquisitions. Now, as Dave Dombrowski is always going to do, he had more hits than misses. But some of his misses were big. The big acquisition for a position player standpoint was Whit Merrifield, and he absolutely stunk. Now, he looked like a good acquisition. We believed at the time, hey, it's a great move by Dave Dombrowski. So you kind of have to – he doesn't get to have the hindsight of saying, well, I get to travel in the future and then look back on these moves. No, he makes them in the moment, and in the moment we like the move. So I can't totally fault him, but at the same time, big-time miss. Whit Merrifield did not work out at all. You flat out released him partway through the year, and then he went to a division rival. Like, that was a horrible miss by Dave Dombrowski, and probably should have found a way to see it. I don't know. I can't ask the guy to predict the future, but maybe you could have seen that the dude who's used to having more playing time in a partial role was not going to be as consistently ready to go, and could have figured something out from that standpoint. I don't know exactly how you would have seen it, but that's his job to do that. And it's an unfair ask, but that is the position. A miss on Whit Merrifield. Look at the trade deadline acquisitions, right? Because the other stuff in the offseason, I don't know. You didn't really bring in too many guys that made too much of an impact. David Dahl played a little bit. He had some moments. Sure. That was a solid signing by Dave Dombrowski. You brought in some minor league guys that really helped you out. And, okay, like Spencer Turnbull, good signing by Dave Dombrowski. Good guy to bring in there to kind of play that Michael Lorenzen role, and he did an amazing job to start the season. We didn't really evaluate Spencer Turnbull this year because he's a free agent. Maybe they'll bring him back. But that was a major hit by Dave Dombrowski. The trade deadline was one hit and one miss. And clearly, Austin Hayes was a miss. And you can't really evaluate it based on the injuries, but you can tell what the organization thought of him when they released him. They chose not to tender him a contract. He is a free agent. They said, no, we don't want you back with the club option. That's a miss. Whenever you trade for a guy at the deadline, you have a club option and you say, we're not going to take it. You did not get the player you thought you were getting. That was your big acquisition to help the offense. The offense was a big reason why you got knocked out. That's another one where I say, well, Dave Dombrowski needed to do more at the trade deadline. But on the flip side of that coin, you have Carlos Estevez, who I think was a really, really great addition, and they could bring back in free agency if they want to re-sign him and pay him a boatload of money. But he was very important for the bullpen, especially moving on from Sir Anthony Dominguez and moving on from Gregory Soto. You look at that and you say, okay, well, you needed someone to shore up the backside of that Philadelphia Phillies bullpen. And Dave Dombrowski got that guy in Carlos Estevez, who was really, really good. That's an awesome trade deadline acquisition. That is like high marks, A+ marks. He did everything you want him to do besides, well, going out and giving up that grand slam to Francisco Lindor. Well, listen, tough spot to put Estevez in there. And I get it, why they went to him. I'm not here to relitigate the Francisco Lindor grand slam. What I will say is Carlos Estevez, for what you looked for him to do, acquiring him at the trade deadline, largely did his job. That was a major hit by Dave Dombrowski. And then Tanner Banks kind of sits in the middle where you didn't really see much of him, and you didn't really pitch him in big spots, but you didn't really get him to be a high leverage guy. You got him to be like a specialist lefty, and I guess he was okay for that. And you're going to have him back this year, and you're going to see if he's a guy that can make more headway in the bullpen with a full year. That's kind of the middle of the road. So you had some big misses. You had a big hit in Carlos Estevez. You had some guys kind of all around. I don't know if Estevez is enough to outdo, though, the Austin Hayes miss, the Whit Merrifield miss. Like, Dave Dombrowski did not have a good enough year. And there was only so much he could have done. It's going to be a lot easier to evaluate Dave Dombrowski in 2025 because they're changing some things this offseason. And I have a lot of faith in Dave Dombrowski to make the right decisions and put this team in position to contend. He is a guy that builds contenders. And the Philadelphia Phillies this last year were contenders. Even though they did not close out the job, they were indeed contenders. So it's just like I look at it and I say, how harsh can I be on a guy whose team won the division? Not very, but Dave Dombrowski. So let's do this one first, right? Compared to his peers, I'm going to give Dave Dombrowski like an A-, B+ for 2024. He was well above average, but I can't put him in that like elite tier because he didn't make like these monster moves that brought in guys that were game changers for the Phillies. Now he didn't need to, but the guys that he did bring in, if he had big time hits on those, who knows what they could have done. The Phillies could have been a 100+ win team. They could have been the 1 seed. They could have not had to worry about playing the Mets. They could have gotten an easier matchup. Who knows how the season ends. Compared to expectations, though, you know what's funny? I'm going to go below average for Dave Dombrowski. I'm going to give him a C-, which feels harsh. But the winning of the division, I think, is a feat that's largely built on the moves of previous seasons, not what he did this year. And we're evaluating Dave Dombrowski for 2024. You almost like, it's like returns in business where you look at the quarterly revenue and that's like the reaction to what you did like last year at this time. Well, kind of that's what you do with Dave Dombrowski. The returns this year, the wins, the division title, all of that stuff are based on moves that he's made years in the past. And what he did this year is what we're evaluating. And he wasn't that good. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. Like, he's still a lock Hall of Famer. And you should still have a lot of faith in Dave Dombrowski. Like, everybody has those years where it's just like the guys they bring in, they don't hit the same way. And I don't mean hit like literally like swing the bat, hit the baseball. No, like they don't end up playing out the way that you would expect them to. When not everyone bats 1,000, right? Nobody bats 1,000, actually, I should say. And Dave Dombrowski's not going to. But it was a down year. He's going to have a good year this year. You should feel good about the direction of this franchise under him. It's not ripping him apart. It's just evaluating it fairly, and he gets below average marks for his 2024 season, which probably means take a good bet that he's going to have a bounce back year in 2025 and find some big time additions for the Philadelphia Phillies, because that's how you become a lock future Hall of Famer. And Dave Dombrowski still is that. So that's all for our evaluations, players, coaches, all of that stuff. We're all done. We're going to get into free agents on Monday. Guys that could be Phillies, not guys that were this year, not guys that are still going to be. No, guys that could be, that you could add to the team. This is where it gets fun. This is where it gets interesting. Who should the Philadelphia Phillies look to acquire in free agency? We're going to break down so many over the next month or so, and hopefully get some news to react to as they do start acquiring players. So we're heading into December. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for checking us out again. Locked On Phillies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure, once again, you're rating and reviewing wherever you're listening to this. If it's in podcast form, and if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, please. Number one way to help us out, get you notifications when new episodes are posted. Free, easy. It's a great way to say thank you for the content. It's a great way to keep up with the content. That's it. So free agency has begun, but free agent talk on Locked On Phillies starts on Monday. I'll talk to you then on our next episode.